Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. It is another Tuesday morning, and this week we are going to be talking about general season whitetail deer. This is one of my favorite hunts of the year. It's a popular one in the northeastern Washington and runs kind of along the same lines as mule deer, just a different species.
Yeah, I feel like whitetail often gets overshadowed when people think of western deer hunting. People just think mule deer, but we've got some killer whitetail hunting, man. If you put some time and dedication into it, it can be honestly more rewarding than a mule deer hunt. And I say that as a mule deer lover. But folks, you guys already know the drill. Before we get started, we just want to thank the partners that make this possible. First and foremost, Vortex Optics. If you shop at eurooptic.com, use code SY10. It will save you some cash on all vortexopticsproducts.com. And the reason why I love them is because, one, the products work, but they just fit all the different budgets that, you're on a strict budget or you got all the money to spend in the world. Vortex has something for you.
Another company that we work with this podcast is Onyx Hunt. This is just an awesome mapping software. Onyx is available on your phone as well as desktop. Desktop is a great option if you're doing the scouting from home. If you're on your phone, they've got some great features. One of the little hidden features in there under tools is the compass mode. And in the compass mode, they have a range finding tool. So especially after you make that shot on that animal, you just point your phone to where you shot the animal at, dial in the yardage, drop a pin, and we've had some really good success having that pin be really close to where we recover the animals, especially with finding blood. If it's a thick country or country that looks a lot different once you're over there, it's a great tool.
That's right. Lastly, Tacticam Reveal cell cams. These are our trail cams of choice. Nate and I, we've been using them for the past several years, and honestly, if you're looking for a cell cam, look no further than Reveal. We love them. They are very effective, extremely long battery life, but if you want to extend it, plug in the solar panel, and you have essentially a camera that's live year-round. So check them out, Tacticam Reveal. My particular favorite is the new Reveal Ultra, because you can live stream. As crazy as it sounds, you can live stream. And people might dog on it for being fair trace, but I have never killed an animal because my cell cam went off. It simply just saves me time from having to go and actively check these trail cams, especially when I'm busy during the hunting season.
Absolutely. Well, before we jump into whitetail, we are going to do the weekly Trivia Duel.
That's right. This is, bar none, my favorite part of the podcast. Some of you guys might enjoy us talking about stories or tips and stuff. I just like the game aspect of it.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
Nate, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. Totally off topic of deer hunting. Actually, we're going to go down the fishing.
Oh, we don't get many fishing questions.
Okay. This question is about a species called tiger muskie.
Okay.
Tiger muskie is actually a sterile fish, as you may know, and it is a crossbreed between two other fish species. What are the two fish species that a tiger muskie is a crossbreed between?
If I get this one wrong, that would be greatly embarrassing, but I might get it wrong. I'm going to say that a tiger muskie is the crossbreed between a northern pike and an actual muskie.
That is correct.
Okay. If I got that one wrong, folks, you could just call me a fraud.
But for those of us that don't live and breathe fishing as well, it was I found that really interesting.
Yeah, so just a little fun fact. The reason why particularly Fish and Game in Washington use tiger muskies is because they're sterile and they can't reproduce. They can control that predator, which then helps control like populations of other game fish like bluegills.
Huh.
For example, like northern pike, they can reproduce crazy, and we have a northern pike problem because we can't control how fast they repopulate. So Fish and Game has now used this strategy to utilize these tiger muskies, where if they put in 5 tiger muskies, they know that there's only going to be 5 tiger muskies in that body of water, and they don't have to worry about those tiger muskies obliterating all the other game fish. So it's kind of a management tool that they're using with tiger muskies. And you can only keep them if they're over 50 inches.
Huh.
Which is huge. That's a big fish. I don't think I've ever seen anybody catch over a 50. There might be 1 or 2 people that have caught over a 50 in the recent years that I know of, but it's a rare fish.
Yeah, and there are some places around Northeast Washington to fish them as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of lakes. I mean, Newman Lake's probably the most common one, but tiger muskies are Yeah, they're pretty well spread out throughout a lot of the lakes around Spokane.
All right, what do you got for me?
Well, I decided to stay on the track of deer.
Okay.
How many nasal scent receptors are white-tailed deer estimated to have? This is multiple choice.
Okay.
A, 100 million. B, 150 million. C, 200 million. And D, 300 million.
1, 150,
2 and 3.
2 and 3. I'm going to go with 200 million.
Final answer?
Final answer. I have no idea, though. That's all a lot.
White-tailed deer are estimated to have about 300 million scent receptors in their nose.
Wow.
So, some context. Humans have about 5 million. So, white-tailed deer have approximately 60 times greater of a smell than we do. Now, a testament to that is the bloodhound, which is a species of a dog. And the bloodhounds have the greatest nose out of all the dog species in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Bloodhounds are often used for tracking and whatnot. And white-tailed deer rival the bloodhound's nose at 300 million.
Interesting.
So
I wonder how many receptors a black bear has then.
I guess that's a trivia duel for you to ask me another time.
All right, I like it.
There you go, folks. That's Trivia Duel. And on the topic of this week, well, first off, folks, I appreciate you guys sending in your guys' success photos. We're like in the heart of it right now. Season just kicked off. But, you know, if you guys are successful in the field, Nate and I love when you guys send us photos that you guys are successful, whether it's a little grouse or a deer. Like, send us photos on Instagram or on our email down in the description below. But this week, we want to focus on white-tailed deer, particularly here in Washington, because I feel like it's in, like, the people who live here do it.
Mm-hmm.
But for the people that don't live here, some of them don't even know we have white-tailed deer. So when I say, oh, we whitetail hunt all the time, people are like, really? Like, there's whitetail. And it's kind of a sleeper hunt.
Absolutely.
If I had to say so myself, the general whitetail season in October with the rifle is honestly one of my favorite hunts. Unfortunately, with how Washington seasons work, we have such short time. The seasons are so short. I just don't usually have enough time to actually go dedicate to this whitetail hunt, which is why I want to touch on it, because I feel like this is something that we can all learn something from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, like Smong, you know, we've talked about mule deer quite a bit recently on the podcast and making the switch over to whitetail. Mule deer isn't really something during the general season that I've spent much time, well, during the mule deer season, I guess, unless you have a quality tag, is something I've spent much time dedicated to. On the other hand, whitetail is my go-to yearly rifle hunt, both early season and in the future, what we'll talk about during late season. A lot of emphasis in Washington gets put on the late season whitetail deer hunt because it's one of the closest deer hunts that we get to the rut with any deer species in Washington as an over-the-counter tag. However, don't let that overshadow early season whitetail. And one of the coolest things about this hunt, and I'll talk a little bit just about my early season whitetail hunt last year, is the opportunity that you get with a rifle. In a lot of other states is basically during a time of the year that you get the opportunity with archery with whitetail, or just an opportunity to hunt these animals still kind of almost in their summer patterns, depending on the year. So I just want to jump back just a year until last year and kind of talk through what I saw during my early whitetail hunt.
Yep.
So here in Northeast Washington, we have a lot of timber company and we have a lot of national forest and we have a good bit of DNR, but we have a lot of public accessible hunting. And a lot of times people associate whitetail hunting with private, with agricultural fields, kind of with this border zone in between agricultural and timber. And if they don't have access to that private, they kind of throw it out the window. But there is there's a serious population in northeastern Washington of what I like to kind of refer to as mountain bucks, as mountain whitetail bucks. And these are the whitetail that live a lot of times in the same regions as mule deer, really high elevation. The bucks will usually stick around way higher in the summer. The does will be a little bit lower. They'll kind of cross the paths of those two circles of their areas during the rut. But before season, with Washington season being usually somewhere in the second to third week of October, and depending, and usually a few days longer than the mule deer season. So usually Washington has about a 2-week whitetail season. You get the opportunity to hunt these animals in the end of their summer pattern and their transition into their pre-rut fall pattern. So I've hunted the same basin for early season whitetail the last 4 years now. My first time hunting it was late season of 2022. So this will be my 4th year going on. And for those 4 years, I've been chasing the same deer. The first time we encountered him was in 2022. He put the slip on us, and he has continually put the slip on me every year since, both in archery and modern. The closest I have ever gotten, though, to killing this deer was last year during early season. Not during rut, not during late archery when people think about, having encounters with big whitetail. And the reason I was able to get close to this encounter is because after 4 years of learning his home range and learning his summer range, I was actually able to key in on his summer range from the previous years during the October hunt, and he was still hanging out in that area. Now, during the rut, this buck's range opens way up from about a half-mile radius to, I'm not even sure how big, a couple miles. Mm-hmm. And I've seen him all over. However, last year, I was able to use some of those early season factors like bachelor groups, summer patterns, bedding, to key in into a really specific area and actually find this deer, make a play on him. It just unfortunately didn't work out. But that's one of the really cool things about this hunt is you get to hit the hills with a rifle in your hand, and you get to chase deer almost in a summer pattern type of behavior. In bachelor groups, a lot of times with whitetail, they have a pretty small home range during the summer, and so you can even make multiple plays on the same deer if you're going after a specific deer, or make plays on a deer, multiple days in a row, kind of knowing that this is their range, this is their basin. It's not like a mule deer that's going to jump over, 3 miles, a couple ridges, no problem.
Yeah. Whitetails, for those of you that don't know, whitetails, when it comes to their home range, they're very similar to blacktails. So blacktails have a very small home range, anywhere from a half mile to 2 to 3 miles. That's the same exact thing with these whitetails. You rarely ever have a whitetail buck that his general core home range is bigger than 3 miles. Most of the time, it's within a mile. And so if you found a buck, let's say, there's a good chance that he's not really ever far from where you have seen him. Now, obviously, like you mentioned, if you catch him in the rut, that's a completely different story, because at that time in the season, it is actually in their DNA to move, to roam. But when you're talking about early October, like what we're talking about here, they're not really roaming, right? Their goal is just, I'm just here surviving until it's time to go chase does. And the reason why you brought it up is last year I took Dylan out during the October season, and we had a bachelor group of 7 bucks. Mm-hmm. He ended up killing one of them, right? But the advantage of this is, especially if like you, where you are going after one particular deer and you say, I don't care about his buddies, I want this particular deer. The advantage of hunting in October, especially when it's a warmer year where he might still be hanging out with his buddies. If you do the prior work, for example, you've been hunting him for like 3 years, mm-hmm. You start to know not just him, but all the other bucks that call that home range residence. And a lot of these bucks will have an overlapping range. Like they'll share a home range. The advantage of that is if you learn his buddies, if you like let's say you go on a hunt and you glass up not the buck you're after, but one of his buddies, he might not be that far from that buddy if he's still bachelored up. Because I've only seen, so this buck we call Octo. Mm-hmm. This is Nate's buck that he's been going after. We call him Octo, and the first year we saw him was in 2022 during the late season, and he had a buddy, which was a 5x5. Yep. And then last year you saw him with a buddy. You saw him with a Forky, and you were like, I know that Forky because I got him on trail cam. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, it sounds weird to say, but it's like you can use all these little different clues to hone in during this general October season because he's around there. Mm-hmm. He's hanging out with a certain bucks that you can pivot, or he's just in a certain area. One thing that I want to touch on too is during October like this, these deer have not been shot at. So for some of them, they're like, they think they're safe, like nothing's bothered them, and so they're usually more prone to hanging out in clear cuts where they're not really thinking much of it. And so last year when Dylan and I when we went out, we had this herd. I call them a herd because it was like 7 bucks and like 3 does, and they were just bedded in the middle of the clear cut. We had walked past them, we glassed one basin over, and then as we were working our way up or way back, we jumped them out of the brush, and then they just went up into this giant clear cut, and then eventually we went and killed the one that Dylan shot last year. But that is some of the advantages that you don't get when you're hunting the November, because when it comes to November, a lot of these bucks, especially the big mature bucks, they're solitary. So if you see another buck, who knows where your target buck may be. Now, this is only speaking if you have an actual target buck.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just like, I'm going to go out there and I'm just going to shoot, whatever gets me excited, any 4-point whatever, it's also a great time because there's a lot of bucks. And if you spot one buck, generally speaking, he might have a buddy. Now, to go back even farther, way back in the day, like 2000s, when I was like a kid, we hardly ever hunted mule deer. My family, we actually just spend most of our time hunting whitetail during the October and the late season. And believe it or not, most of our wall hangers that we have hanging out throughout the various houses came from the October season. The biggest buck that my dad has shot that's hanging at the house was shot the Monday after opener during October season, right? And he was just in the middle of a clear cut, just minding his own business. He was alone, but he was just like, my dad shot him in a spot where you were like, why is there a buck of that caliber like hanging out here?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was my experience last year. In last year, I put quite a bit of time and effort into early season, and that is something that kind of amazed me time and like morning after morning in this basin. I was hunting for this single deer, and the first morning, which was opening morning, about 45 minutes into daylight, I was actually with our buddy Steve, and we were sitting glassing, and we had seen, it was maybe 45, 50 minutes after daylight, we had already seen 7 or 8, 9 different bucks, probably 30 deer. I mean, the deer numbers during early season is really cool because you still have animals in these feeding patterns of summer trying to bulk up for the winter. So like you said, they're really hitting the clear cuts. They're hitting the feed, which a lot of times means they're in places where they're more exposed, easier to glass. And about 45 minutes, we had already seen a handful of bucks. We'd seen one decent little 4x5 that I had passed on during archery. And Steve was saying, he was like, man, that's a really nice buck up there. And it was Octo. And he was feeding right next to the same little forky that he had spent the whole summer with. So every single time that this deer, this one that we call Octo, came through my trail cam, from August on, he was with this little 2x2. Probably a 1.5-year-old buck, but they always were close together. And in fact, during archery season, when I was sitting in my tree stand for these deer, and this was last year, so we could use salts and scents and bait and all that. So I had thrown some corn out, I had thrown some salt out, and my second or third night sitting, that 2x2 came in. And it was only a little 2x2, but I started shaking and my heart started pounding because I was like, man, I know this is Octo somewhere around here. And unfortunately, this being my first year really hunting from tree stands and hunting this spot by archery, the prevailing winds versus the thermals kind of messed me up, and I kind of blew the setup as far as the wind goes. I heard what I would assume would be Octo blow down below me, and then once I left, he came into the sit about 10 minutes after dark, so 10 or 15 minutes after I left. But it was really cool because going forward again, back to last early season opener, we were seeing him, this very mature deer, what we're gauging now, either at 6.5 or 7.5 this year. So last year he was either 5.5 or 6.5, which is very mature for a whitetail deer in broad daylight, in fairly warm weather, in the middle of a clear-cut opening feeding. And I think I would attribute some of it to the fact, like you said, these deer haven't been shot at yet, whereas during the rut, you're kind of depending on them to get stupid from the rut because otherwise they're smart. They've been shot at. They know what's going on. But they're kind of still in their summer routine. They haven't been hunted yet. They haven't been pressured as far as humans go. Obviously, the predator pressure is ever present. And it's also just a really cool opportunity to see animals.
Yeah, and like I said, I can't speak enough good things about it because everything you just talked about kind of encompasses what this hunt is all about. On average, I see way more deer in terms of numbers during October than I do the late season. And a lot of that simply has to be attributed to the fact that these bucks, they're not just holding up. They're still actively getting out, feeding, and doing all that stuff. Once you get past the general season and you start rolling into November, these whitetail bucks, I mean, and I'll touch more on it, but particularly, like, we're still on the topic of Northeast Washington. Like, these bucks, they kind of, once that October season rolls out, this is when they really start to hole up, because now they're really like, I'm just waiting until these does go in heat. Like, I don't want to show myself. I'm just storing as much energy as possible. And so the October season just allows you some opportunity before they actually really hole up, because as many deer as you may see during October, the moment that these bucks flip that switch and they say, I'm going to go hole up, it is like a desert. It's like there's no deer here. You will be surprised of how much activity you see during early October and like late October or like first week of November, because it is night and day difference of how many deer you're going to pick out.
Yeah, it's interesting. And a lot of times, this is one of the mental games you unfortunately get to play during this time, is if you are watching a bachelor group of bucks during this October frame and you see them kind of feet apart, the question we are always asking ourselves is that bachelor group splitting up for the year? Is it splitting up, or are they just kind of feeding to a little bit different area for the day, or was that it for them? And amazingly, more often than not, it seems to us hunting future days after watching that was their split. And so this is one of the maybe downsides, you could say. But the difference you can see if you hunt throughout the whole early season of whitetail, from the beginning of the season to the end of this season, can be kind of, when you're sitting there on a really dead day of hunting, looking at a basin, and there's nothing moving, and you kind of just assume that there's no animals in there. But in the back of your mind that on the best day ever, you'd be looking and seeing animals everywhere. There's the same amount of animals in there, especially with white-tailed deer. They're just holed up and they're in thick brush. They're not out in the open anymore. And so that's why hunting, if you get the opportunity near the more beginning days of that season, especially as far as deer goes, since it's a little bit longer season for us, can be really advantageous. Another cool thing about the season that I think is really kind of does cater this as a hunt that is good for people newer into hunting or more beginner hunters, is if you're not yet driven by that quote unquote X factor that the rut brings, which I think is, why a lot of us love hunting the rut, is because there's always this factor of you just don't know what's going to show up. You know what the basin might normally hold, what the area might normally hold, but who's to say that during the rut, this giant, just monarch of a mountain whitetail buck isn't going to show up looking for a hot doe? You're not going to run into that as much during the early season, because you're going to get deer still in their patterns. But because of that, it makes it a bit more predictable of a hunt. So if you have the patience to watch deer and not go after the first, forky you see or whatever it is, there's so much to learn during the season by just watching the deer. You can watch the same deer, deer that are unique, either does that are identifiable or bucks that are identifiable, and you can watch their patterns day in and day out, kind of like people do in the summertime. With the scouting, only you get to do it with the rifle in your hand, where if the buck makes a slip up, or you were able to predict his movement from prior days of their patterns, that's really going to help you in your success of the hunt. But it's such a cool hunt that, like you said, the deer numbers historically that we see during the early season hunt are the best of the year.
Yeah, I mean, how often do you have days where you're picking out 40 deer in a day?
Yeah.
It's rare to, if I go out here and I have a day where I pick out 30, 40 deer, that's an excellent day. And more times than not, like during these October early season, I might not always see 40 deer, but 20 deer a day is fairly common. Now, they're not always megas or they're not always bucks, but like there's deer around, and I mean, to prelude to our podcast in the future, like in 2 weeks where we talk about the late whitetail hunt, if you have 20 does in this one little basin, guess what's going to eventually show up, right? Now, one thing I want to touch, because we are October, the biggest thing that I can vouch for is if you decide and commit yourself to scouting for whitetail in the summer, a lot of times these big bucks, they will show themselves. I personally love scouting them in August because it's like they're still in their true summer patterns because they're still in velvet. Once they start shedding their velvet, it's finicky. You don't really know exactly what they're going to do. But so like earlier this year in August, I took Wachong and we went into this basin. And in this little basin, we glassed up like 8 different shooters. And I'm talking, these are like quality bucks. And they're within a span of 800 yards. Now, it might be August, it might not mean much. But again, you have to understand, because we went during summer and all these bucks were still willing to expose themselves in the daylight. It just allowed us a head count of like, these are how many bucks are using this one area. And come October, they might not be very far from this area. So this week, if I feel like it, might go back in there, because it's just like, we know how many bucks are here. We know the caliber of deer in here. And with just how that particular area worked with access and feed and all that good stuff put together into that equation, it just sets up for a hunt with a very high possibility that you might pull a masher out of there. Now, that's scouting, so you guys can plan for 2026. But the reason why I bring it up now is because I'll touch it on our podcast 2 weeks now, because when it comes to whitetails, I think it's a year-round scouting thing. You will always learn something about whitetails, whether you put a trail cam up in November or you did in June, because there's something to learn about it. Like Octo, we pretty much have that buck, pinned from January through December. We not always know exactly where he's going, or, we don't have all his beddings figured out. But generally, if you put a map in front of Nate of his home range, Nate can probably be like, oh, in June, this is typically where he shows up. This is how he kind of works around. And then October, this is what he does. The reason why we're bringing it up so much, and I'm not even one to speak on this, because hardly ever in my life have I actually gone after one specific animal. I've always just kind of been like, I like to know what's in the area, and I'll go hunt, and if it gets me excited, I'm going to shoot it. Nate's really kind of taken that up a notch and be like, I'm after one deer, and that's all I'm after. Basically, what we're trying to do here is we're giving you guys all the different ways you can approach a whitetail deer hunt in October. That's basically all we're trying to do. But basically, now we just want to pivot back, because I think you guys have enough context now, hopefully, with everything we just blabbered about. Like, there's enough context of why you should do this hunt and some of the advantages of why you do this hunt. But then the other thing now is like, how do you actually hunt them, right? Like tactics. Yeah. And it might not be as hard as people might think.
Yeah, I think talking about kind of just how our day-to-day looks in an early season whitetail hunt, it would be maybe helpful to you guys. Maybe not, but who knows? That's why we're here to just ramble about this type of stuff. But I think the style that whitetail hunting in the early season offers in this part of the state is another reason, and I'm not just trying to market this hunt to newer hunters or to novice hunters, but I really do think it is a great entry hunt for a lot of people because of the numbers of things that we've already talked about, as well as the kind of the style of hunting that this offers. Sure, you can make this a backcountry backpacking hunt, super intense, glassing 10, 12 hours a day. But another thing that you can do is use this hunt as an opportunity to day hunt these deer. October, you still run 12-ish hours of daylight in the state. Usually sunrise around 7 a.m., sunset around 7 p.m. So, throw in 30 minutes or so if it's clear out on the either side for glassing. But because during the early part of this season, at least, a lot of times it's still hot, in the 70s, maybe even 80s during the day. If it's a clear, warm year, you're going to still encounter the summer habits of the deer as far as their feeding and bedding go. So they're going to be fairly nocturnal, which means your best bet at glassing deer is going to be the morning hours and the evening hours. Sure, you can see deer throughout the day. It's absolutely a possibility. But most of your numbers as far as glassing count is going to go is going to come from deer movement in the feeding area during the morning before they go to bedding, and then right in that evening when they come out of their bedding to go back to feed throughout the night. However, that being said, if that's the general 80% of the time, October in this part of the state, especially as you get in higher elevation, has the unknown of the weather that can throw the whole thing for a loop. Whether that's rain or even in honestly not so rare of a scenario, some snow flurries. And we've run into both of these. And this can really change your hunting experience. It can stir deer movement up. One of the times in our early season that we found a lot of success is after a few days of rain, because this is when moisture really picks up in this part of the state. And this is something that you've seen with our buddies from Oregon when they've come up to hunt, is we get a lot of fog with rain. Mm-hmm. And so if we have a few days where it's really rainy, sometimes the deer will bed down a little bit more during that. They won't be quite as active. And then if we have another little burst of warm weather, it will be like a rejuvenated hillside with deer movement. So kind of just to summarize, on a day-to-day hunt, you've got really prime mornings and evening glassing like you do with most hunts, but especially for whitetail deer because they're still such a habitual animal. And then kind of that X factor of the weather that can happen during this season puts a little bit of unpredictability, if that's a word, it might not be, into the deer movement, which can sometimes totally change up the pattern. It can split the bucks up. It can bring them all out. It can make the hillside look like a ghost, but you're not going to know unless you're out there.
The biggest thing I can vouch for, and again, I don't know if this is actually true, but this is just from my experience of hunting both mule deer and whitetail. When it rains or there's bad weather out, mule deer, from my experience, they tend to just hunker down. They hide. They don't like it. Whitetails, on the other hand, dude, if it is ripping wind and there's sleet, you best bet that the deer are going to be out. I don't know what it is about whitetail, but they love nasty weather. I have seen, and more so in the late season when you actually see like bad weather, but occasionally, like you say, a storm does roll through October. But like I have seen just the deer, and sometimes like there's this one particular moment I remember. It's a doe, and she was standing in the wide open of a clear cut, like in the middle of a giant clear cut, and it was sleeting and it was windy, and it was so bad. And in my head, I'm like, why is this doe suffering? Because I was like, I'm suffering over here under an umbrella. And this doe is just casually standing there, like literally just bracing the storm. And every time I looked at her, it almost like she was like standing, but she was like sleeping. Like you could tell like she was closing her eyes. It's almost like she was enjoying being out in the sleet and this ripping wind. And I'm like, this is the weirdest thing ever. But that's something that just comes with whitetails. I don't know what it is about it, but something about that bad weather just gets them up and out. So the first year in 2022 that Nate and we actually hiked into this spot where we now hunt octo out of, it was during October general season. And Nate, I think he was like, hey, I have like 2 days off. Or no, it wasn't even that. Nate hit me up. He's like, I have half day tomorrow off. And I kind of want to go hunt. I don't want to sit around and do something. And I'm like, hey, well, I got a bunch of random pins. We could just go and find one. And so we hiked in there the day after a rainstorm had come. And when we went in there, when we hiked in that morning, it was still like you were getting like the tail end of it where a lot of moisture is on the ground. Everything is wet. You had some fog coming through in and out. It was still overcast, but just no active rain. Mm-hmm. And in the 3 hours that we hunted there, we saw a lot of deer.
We saw a lot of deer.
Just out in these open clear cuts, doing their own thing. I mean, we could have blasted a 2x1 like at 50 yards if we wanted to, but Nate opted to pass. But the reason why I bring up the weather is because if it's a bad weather, I treat whitetail completely different than mule deer. If it's a bad weather and I'm after mule deer, I would just see like I'm just gonna sit back. I'm gonna wait for the storm to go by. But if it's a whitetail hunt, you best bet I'm out there, and I don't care if it's okay. Obviously, be safe about it. Don't go out of your way to go into a storm and get yourself hurt. Use your best judgment. But if it's just like 15, 20 mile per hour winds with some rain, like go sit out there.
Yeah, and another thing too is a lot of times with the bad weather comes decreased visibility. Like I was saying, it either gets really foggy or hunting in the little bit higher up elevation, kind of in these the mountain whitetail range. You're at 3, 4, 5,000 feet. You're kind of in the rain, not below the rain. So you're kind of in the cloudy rain, and so if your visibility goes down, rather than sit somewhere where we would normally glass, where we can see anywhere from, say 300 yards out to a mile, where we're glassing all these different hillsides, you're not going to be able to do that a lot of times. And so pick a spot where you have much closer range. You're going to have to, be okay with not feeling like you're glassing every hillside in the basin, but you might be glassing, 100 acres of feed or plot or timber edge that is 150 yards away from you, and that's okay because A, it's raining, deer might be moving more, they might be out more. B, with the decreased visibility, you're not going to be able to see as far anyway. And C, if something does come in, you're already in shooting range, you're already set up, you're not having to make a big play in the storm. So if you do want to do something like set up a shelter, set up a tarp, set up sit under an umbrella, the Samong special.
Yep.
Those are options. Now, obviously, if it's raining and you still have great visibility, there's no reason not to set up somewhere where you can glass long ways. But a lot of times, if you're parking and hiking in, and it's poor weather, from where you're parked, looking into where you're going to hike, you might be thinking, man, I shouldn't even hike in. I can't even see it up in there. But if you can see 100, 150 yards, do that. And if you can't, if it's so foggy that it's not even worth glassing, it's never a bad idea to find some of those. We talked about this a couple podcasts ago with the mule deer about these transition areas where your uncle that sits and watches an area that's like 80 to 150 yards away, kind of between the open feed and the true dark timber. Sit somewhere like that. You're probably going to be sitting at the bottom because the thermals are going down and looking a bit more up the ridge or up the hillside. But if you can sit only somewhere where you can see, 75, 100 yards, sit there because the weather brings it out of them.
Yeah, and Nate and I, if you're new here, we put a lot of emphasis into glassing, spot and stock, because frankly, we find a lot of our success because of that. We enjoy the glassing aspect of it. We enjoy picking out an animal that's outside of our immediate shooting distance, having to put a game plan together, and then executing that stock. But as we're mentioning here, sometimes that's not the most effective way given the conditions that you have. So Nate already mentioned one where, if you're playing with fog, go sit somewhere where you might predict to have deer movement. The other one too, and this is something that I put an asterisk with because whitetails in their very nature, they're very skittish. And so they just tend to pick up on your sounds, your smell a little bit more. They're a little bit more finicky. They're a little bit more prone to just running away than like, say, a mule deer. But one of the most common things that we did back then, especially my family, because we didn't grow up having people hold our hands and teach us. We didn't grow up with optics and whatnot. So we just walked roads until we jumped a deer and then we shot the deer. So basically, it's still hunting, but you're just not in the timber. You're just walking these gated roads. And it's very effective. Now, the reason why I put an asterisk to it is because this is a good way to actually encounter deer, and many times encounter deer within immediate shooting distance. The problem with it is, like I said, a lot of times these whitetail deer, once you spook them, they tend to not stop. So you kind of just spook them out and they just keep running. And then, if you're not taking a running shot, well, there goes the deer. The other one is once you start spooking deer around like that, it's a sure way to start making these deer hole up. And so that's why I put it with an asterisk, because these white-tailed deer especially, they're very sensitive to pressure. That's why I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, during the early season, one of the biggest benefits is these deer have not been shot. They haven't been bumped around. But the moment you start, they start seeing more hunters out in the woods or even getting shot at, they learn really quick, especially these mature deer that have been around and play the game. So, yes, you can walk the roads and essentially just jump shoot them, if you will. But it's not my first choice with whitetail because many times you just don't have a stable shot because a lot of times with the deer's running, your first instinct is not, oh, let me go find the best rest. It's, no, what do I have right then and there to make the shot count? And so if you're a more inexperienced hunter, that's a big task to, just shoot off your knee or something at a whitetail deer that's most likely on the move. Occasionally, yes, you might get a deer that runs up there and he turns broadside and you shoot him. That happens. Obviously, it happens. It also just depends on how spooked that deer actually is. Sometimes they don't ever see you. They just hear something's a little off because of your boot rubber rubbing against the rock, and they just kind of run up, and then they just simply want a better vantage to look at you. They stop to give you a shot. Other times, if you spook them, like if you turn around a corner and they're right there on the road 15 yards away and they just like make eye contact with you, they're gone. So you have to understand the natural behavior of whitetail. They're very skittish by nature, which is why when it comes to whitetail particularly, I put way more emphasis on glassing from far away, making a game plan where I have the least or the lowest probability of that deer either smelling me, seeing me, or hearing me. Prime example was in 2022, the day that we spotted Octo, we lost Octo. Nate and I, we were hunting in like 2 foot of snow, and it was like 8 degrees that day. And so what had happened was because it was so cold, that top layer of that snow had this super icy crunch to it. And we relocated this 5x5 that was just bedded under this tree, and we were like 450 yards away. 450 yards away across a canyon. And every time me and Nate like just slightly moved because we had to reposition ourselves and that snow kind of made a crunch, that buck would get out of his nap and he would turn and just look in our general direction. Like they are so keen to these little movements or little sounds, which is why, again, glassing is where I would recommend. But again, I'm just simply giving you guys options of what you can do. Let's say you get up there and you have 10 feet of visibility. It doesn't matter. The time that I would particularly say, I'm just going to walk this road and essentially still hunt is one, when it's in the middle of a downpour or when it's extremely foggy. When it's foggy, I don't know what it is about these deer, but they just tend to not be as skittish. We have walked up to like deer, like whitetail deer, and like you're 40 yards away. And they're just like looking at you. And then we shoot them. I don't know if that's because they feel like they're more hidden. I don't know what it is, but we've killed a lot of deer hiking in the fog or hiking in the rain during the middle of the day. A lot of these things happen in the middle of the day, like 12, 1 o'clock, when a lot of people think that these deer are bedded. But like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times nasty weather gets these whitetails up and moving. So some of the biggest bucks we have killed have come from the middle of the day, low visibility, or times where people just kind of count out the hunt and say there's no point of being out here. So that's the thing I love about whitetail hunting. It's so volatile, and you can't really just say, oh, do this or don't do that, because at the end of the day, every little strategy kind of has its place, and you can't really count it out. Some people even sit in tree stands with a rifle. That's just another way to do it, because one thing is whitetail, they tend to live in brushy country. And so what happens when you're ground level, per se, you're glassing a hillside, you can't see into the brush. So people will try to people will come up with ways to elevate themselves. And if you hunt around Spokane, and I'm sure many other places, occasionally you run into these super old time tree stands where you're like, there's a guy that has probably moved on from hunting now and doesn't even visit this place anymore. And there's a tree stand here. And I went up and sat in some of them. Obviously, use your best judgment. Some of those tree stands are really old and they're on the verge of falling apart. But I have sat up in these tree stands, and it just, like from the ground, you don't think much of that spot. But the moment you get yourself 10 feet off the ground, it's like a whole new world. And you're like, whoa, this is way better. I have actually shot at a deer out of a tree stand like that. Granted, I completely missed, but it's just like I would have never got that shot if I just stayed down low because the brush was so high. But because I was elevated, I was able to like look down into these little pockets of the brush. And eventually a doe finally stood up and then walked out, and then I completely whiffed because I was a noob at 14 years old. Had no idea what I was doing. But that's the beauty of whitetail hunting. With a rifle, that's really all there is, right? Like you're either sitting and perched up and glassing, or you're walking around with a rifle hoping to jump shoot a whitetail deer. The other one that you can do, and it kind of has to do with this. Now, Nate and I, when we're talking about these whitetails, we're really honing in on these regions where you have clear cut and you have a lot of gated roads. There are plenty of places throughout eastern Washington and other states too where whitetails inhabit places where it's like a mule deer. There's no roads, rugged country, high elevation mountains. Now that's a little bit different story, because those are the places where I start implementing mule deer tactics for those whitetails, because those higher altitude elevations, sometimes it's thicker. You don't really have a clear cut that you can glass. Mm-hmm. You might have a natural open ridge that is just like maybe a couple 100 yards wide, if even, that they might come out to feed, and they're like in and out. Like they don't spend any daylight. So the only way to really get to them is find them in their bedroom during the day when they're in the dark timber. One of the underutilized things, especially in the early season, is calling. So a lot of people will resort to calling in the late season. They'll grunt, they'll do doe bleeds and whatnot. But the thing that I feel like people don't really understand is deer are pretty vocal throughout the year. Mm-hmm. And I have honestly had a higher success ratio calling in deer during October than I have in November. The most common one is just sparring. Find yourself like antlers like this and just spar around. Don't do a full-blown fight because it's not fighting season. But in October, they will spar. Mm. Spar around. Clash some antlers around. You just don't know what's going to come and peek at you, because we've called in some pretty gnarly bucks just by like dinking around with some antlers. So that's basically my little spiel of tactics of how I typically hunt whitetails. Obviously, like we said, if you're hunting archery, that's a little bit different in what we're talking about here. But that's like September. You're either out a tree stand or you're spot and stock, like a much higher grade level of spot and stock, because you're now talking about trying to get to 40 yards rather than like 400 yards, right? Mm. So really, October whitetail, with everything we have said, it's basically why you should do it, why we think it's good, some of the tactics that we use, and what else is there to be said? Like, are we missing anything?
No, as kind of a side non-hunting note, one of the things that year in and year out is one of my favorite parts of the early whitetail hunt is it tends to be, you're out there earlier in the morning, and it tends to be some of the first mornings of fall, or what feel like fall. It's been a hot summer. You've maybe been scouting, you've been sweating your butt off, maybe doing some August bear hunting, just dying in the heat. And then you get out there for October, you get out there for deer season, you're hunting deer, you've got a rifle in your hand, you get out of the car at 5 a.m. and there's a crisp, there's a little bit of bite in the air. It's maybe in the 40s. The leaves are starting to change a little bit. And whether you have a successful day of hunting or not, that is just a really special time to be outside during the year. And it surprises me every year, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, and so I guess to kind of wrap this portion up, why would you go after a whitetail when there's a mule deer season? So we touched it. So with how Washington works here, mule deer closes, the mule deer general season closes on the second Tuesday of season. So we get 10 days, full days to hunt mule deer. Whitetail season here in Northeast Washington, you get an extended, you go until the Friday. So you get the extra Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday to hunt. So you get 3 extra days to hunt whitetail. So sometimes, if that's all you have off, like that's all you can do. It's just whitetail hunt. Now, even though Nate and I are really pivoting and we're really honing in on Northeast Washington, do not overlook the whitetail hunting that is in the other regions of Eastern Washington. Mm-hmm. So the North Central, like foothills of the Cascades / the Okanagan Valley, slammer bucks up there, right? But up there, you don't have the generosity of the same season that we have here in Northeast Washington. They close that same Tuesday, that mule deer season. So you get 10 days versus our 13 days here in Northeast Washington. Down in the blues, the foothills of the Blue Mountains, great hunting down there too. But the reason why Nate and I, we don't really focus in like the central area, like Ritzville type stuff, or down in the Palouse, is because it's a lot of private land.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have permission to hunt down there, oh, you might just pull a slammer whitetail, because sometimes when I'm really bored, I'll just go drive down there, like just find a random road, and I'm looking at private property, but man, there are some studs just walking around eating hay and whatever alfalfa they have.
Yeah, I mean, to say that we hunt, that the whitetail bucks in this area state are in the mountain whitetails is not to say that the agriculture Midwestern style does not exist, because we have that too. We have a lot of phenomenal agriculture country in Washington, like you said, all the way from the Okanagan down to the Palouse, up to even, over by the Idaho border. There's a lot of agriculture. And man, that mixed with some of the mountainous terrain that the agriculture borders brings some big bucks into the private. So if that's your game, that's never really been either of our games, but if that's your game, it's
all I'm saying here is there are some slammer bucks running around, some slammer whitetails running around here in Washington. And the reason why, I guess to go back to the question I asked, like, why would you go after whitetail over a mule deer? One, we simply have more whitetails. Okay, not that. We have more shootable whitetails. I would say it like that, because we don't have the antler point restriction for the most part with whitetails that we have a mule deer. Your general mule deer, as far as I'm concerned, you're shooting at least a 3-point minimum buck. There are some units where a whitetail has to be 3-point, but a lot of regions or units that are open for whitetail general season, it's just any buck. So if you wanted to just shoot a spike, get something under your belt, or just fill your freezer, you just have that much more opportunity. And so that's one of the main reasons why I would pivot towards whitetail. I just think you do have a greater chance of finding a legal animal with the whitetail versus a mule deer, because sometimes, I'm not going to lie, man, that third point is just really elusive. You just cannot find a buck that has a third antler tine. So I'm just saying, man, I've been through all the struggles. That's why way back then, like 2014, 2013, like when WDFW changed the Northeast region of whitetails to 4-point minimum, nobody killed a deer. Because, I mean, we were still killing deer, right? But a 4-point minimum restrictions that's a pretty steep restriction. Granted, like most bucks, some bucks don't even get to a 4-point until they're like 2.5. So I'm just saying, now it's obviously taken away. Like it went back to being any buck. So that's one of the main reasons. The other thing is, do not look over our antlerless opportunities. We have great whitetail antlerless hunting opportunities around here. And the best thing about it is they actually allocate quite a bit of tags for it. And so, yes, Nate and I, we've been mainly talking about our general season, over-the-counter buck tags, for example. But just because we're on the topic of whitetail, there are like ample opportunities to go shoot a whitetail doe. Some of it might be more on private land covered units or whatnot. But basically what we're trying to do is we're just trying to spill the beans of the whitetail hunting opportunities here. And those of you who do this year in, year out might hate us for this podcast, but I just feel like there's so much opportunity to go around that, like, I hunt with mule deer and I love mule deer hunting. I put a lot of emphasis to it, but man, sometimes mule deer hunting is simply a struggle. It's just like you go out there and it's just like you can't find a deer. It's just not looking as good as it can, because the one thing, another comparison between whitetail and mule deer, whitetails are really good at rebounding. If a hard winter hits, give that whitetail herd 5 years, they're like up back in no time. You take that same mule deer herd that got hit as hard in the winter, man, they take a long time to rebound and get back to where they originally were. And I think that's a prime example of what's happening right now in like Wyoming. Like that mule deer herd down there they've been struggling for many, many years now. And that's just simply due to the nature of mule deer. For whatever it is, they just don't combat, adversity like that as well as a whitetail do. So that's just some of the nuggets of information that I have on my end about whitetail and mule deer here in Washington.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. Kind of like our podcast go, just a smattering information here and there. And
let's talk about this really quick. Some people ask, like, okay, what gear do you use? Dude, when it comes to whitetails, you can use almost anything and it will kill. Whitetail deer are not the hardest thing to kill.
Yeah.
243 Winchester, 6mm Creedmoor, you name it. Like I know people that shoot deer with the 300 Win Mag. I know that people that kill whitetail deer with the 243. Honestly, if you already have hunting gear, this hunt is kind of it for you because there's really no barrier entry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just kind of like you need a pack, and honestly, you don't even need that good of a pack, honestly, because you're most of the time, if you're hunting how we hunt, you're hiking on a road.
Yeah.
You're like overlooking a clear cut. If you have a pair of binoculars, like even like a Vortex Diamondback, like a $200 binocular, that'll serve you just fine. That's what I started out hunting with many years ago. Use the rifle that you already own. It's just a very simple, easy way to get out there.
Yeah.
And some of my favorite hunts came out of that season.
And there's a lot of public accessible hunting land for 'em.
Absolutely. Well, folks, we hope that was beneficial. Nate and I, oh man, we love this season. So with that said, we just wanted to share our thoughts on it because, again, one of the main reasons why I wanted to talk about this is because I just feel like the whitetail hunting here gets overshadowed by mule deer. You know, and sometimes for good reason, but I feel like sometimes we go a little too far in putting too much emphasis on mule deer and not enough emphasis on whitetail. Yes, our mule deer hunting here can be great, and I enjoy it every year, but man, the whitetail hunting sometimes is just right up there, or sometimes even a little bit better. I'm not going to lie.
Absolutely.
So, with that said, we're going to wrap it up here. But before we go, folks, you guys know what time it is. We're going to give you guys some fast facts. Nate, hit me.
Okay.
Or hit us.
Hit us. All right. I'm going to hit you guys. This is about whitetail this time, not about tiger muskie. Whitetail bucks have something called a vomeronasal organ.
Okay.
And this is not a gland in their nose, but you can think of it kind of like a plumbing system. And it goes from their nose up to the area of their brain. And it funnels the scent from their nose all the way to the area of their brain that controls their drive for breeding. And it funnels the scent of doe urine. So when a buck is, what we call in that full sneak position during the rut, going around and smelling doe urine. In fact, if you go back to Samong's YouTube channel and you watch our blacktail hunt in November of 2024, the buck I killed, there's some really good footage of him on there chasing behind this doe. She pees. He comes right behind her to smell. He's using his vomeronasal organ. It's basically anatomically goes from the nose to the brain. And that's what controls his drive to breed.
And that's when he knows. That's what tells him, like, this doe's ready or she's not ready.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's its own system.
What's the name again? Say it one more time.
Vomeronasal.
Vomeronasal. So that's one of the 300 million scent receptors in his nose.
Possibly.
I don't know. That's not a fast fact, folks. That's just what I thought. Good to know. So now we know what happens when they're actually lip curling. Well, mine is no longer about deer. Mine is about a jellyfish. The immortal jellyfish is a small biological animal that can reverse its life cycle from a mature adult back to a juvenile polyp stage whenever it's stressed or injured. So this process is called transdifferentiation, and it basically just allows this jellyfish to reset its biological clock. So it goes from juvenile to adult. It gets stressed or injured, and then it just goes back to being a juvenile, and then it redoes its growth process, and then does it again, and just kind of repeats the cycle. So essentially, it's immortal, hence the name, the immortal jellyfish. But even though it's technically immortal in that sense, I mean, it's still prone to disease or a predator. And so it's not completely immortal, but speaking of what is considered normal, it is on the lines of immortal. Now, with that said, all jellyfish, not just the immortal jellyfish, all jellyfish, they possess some kind of venom, which is usually poisonous. But it's actually only a very small percentage of jellyfish that have potent venom or poison in them. The immortal jellyfish is actually harmless to us.
Huh.
So as crazy as it can be with just never dying, it's harmless. That's the immortal
jellyfish. I got to
jellyfish.
figure out how to harness that and reverse my biological cycle so I can go back and take advantage of some youth hunting opportunities.
I want to be 12 years old again. No.
Oh, goodness.
That's just a little fact. I needed to throw something out of you from left field because I feel like I've been too on par with our topic. So I was like, you know what? Something crazy, something unexpected.
Maybe I'll embody that in the future weeks here. Just go wild.
That's right.
All right, folks. Well, thanks for joining this week. Thanks for listening to us ramble about early season whitetail. Coming up, we've got some exciting podcasts. We're getting into the heart of hunting season. Like Samong said, send us in your success photos. Send us in your stories. First kids hunt with a grouse all the way up to killing the smasher deer you've been chasing for years, or elk. We love to see it all. We love to hear about them as well, hear about the stories. And until next week, get out there and have a fun hunt.
Good luck out there, fellas.